Hey, so these videos are gonna be a bit different than the tutorial content. I when I was making the tutorials, and I like making the tutorials, but I realized that I really just want a space to talk about games. Like I love games and game design, and so I think these journals are gonna be less structured, sort of off the cuff, just talking about games. And one of the things I wanted to talk about specifically with tutorials and the tutorial series I'm making, and sort of what I'm worried about with most tutorials that I see. And before I say anything, I want to say that I have nothing but love for people making free content to teach people how to make games. I mean, I came up on Brackeys and learning Unity through Brackeys, and that's a great channel. I wish Brackeys would come back. So this isn't out of disrespect. Like I think people making content for other people to learn is great. And a part of the reason why I wanted to start making my own tutorials is because um I've been doing this for like 8 years now. I went to school and I finished school for game design, so I know a lot more now than I did when I started. And it feels good to try to make stuff so that people can learn and kind of give back to this community that taught me all of this, like taught me so much. But what I want to talk about and what I think is missed in tutorials is like I don't know, when you follow a tutorial, it generally covers a topic. Like, you know, let's make a player character. Let's make a thing where you can move around. And then they cover that one topic in one way, and that's not how game design really is. That's not. I don't think that's like the joy of game design. I used to go to Starbucks because they had free Wi-Fi and I needed tutorials, and I would watch tutorials and I would try to program and I would try to figure out things, and I would like download people's code and I would try to break it apart. And that's a fine place to start. But I remember like the pride and also relief I felt when I no longer needed tutorials. Like I could just have a laptop without Wi-Fi and I could make something, and it was like this big accomplishment to me, and I felt good about it. But what that started and what I want to talk about is is the idea that like with anything with creation, whether it's dance or books, literature, or painting or game design, um you you have to find like your voice, like what matters to you, how do you want to make things, um what do you find cool and what do you want to say. And when you follow these like sort of linear tutorials, it doesn't encourage the ability to find that voice, right? Like how do you develop yourself as a game developer? What does that even mean? Well, to me, it meant looking at an empty scene with a player character and programming movement for like 5 years until I really honed how I like to make movement. And movement to me is the mechanic that I like to program. We're all different as developers. I think as you grow, you figure out the parts of game design you really enjoy making, and then you find games you want to make that like accentuate those strengths. I think before you start game design, it's really easy to have ideas that are sort of grandiose. And then I think like if you do it for a year, like you really commit to trying to make games for a year, and you go through all the basics. You make your Flappy Bird and your Pong, and you can make games. Um, you find so fast what you actually care about and what you want to make games about, and what systems interest you. Like, do you want to make games about physics, or do you want to make games that are data based? Like, you might have an idea to make a Devil May Cry style game where there's all these cool combos and all this, but then you start programming and you realize you really like moving data around, and then all of a sudden, you know, inventory systems are interesting to you, and you start making like board games and card games, and that's just because that's what you like making. But there's I haven't found like a space really on YouTube, at least, where people talk about this, and you know, that's what I want to talk about. So like, I know tutorials are great, but really what matters is that you can make these things for yourself enough to figure out what you like. And then when you like something, then like, yeah, do every tutorial there is, because they all do it a little different, and you learn all these interesting things. Like, I can talk about movement, so when you want to talk about movement, it's like, do you want to move something in sort of a physicsy term where you're adding force, and you can think of force as like a push, like a, you know, you're like shoving it, right? And then it's like every frame that your code runs, it's like that shove force is being applied every time. And an easy game to see this is in Asteroids, where the ship just kind of glides in space. Yeah, that's like physics movement at its sort of sloppiest, or like you know, it's very slippery. Physics movement doesn't have to be so slippery. But then there's the other approach of this more linear, like thinking of the world as a graph, like a 3D graph, where your player sits in the world at position 0, 0, 0, X, Y, Z. And if you want to move them forward, you add 1 to the X coordinate over time. And, you know, since our games run at a frame rate and our code executes every frame, then your player looks like he's moving forward because you're adding 1 every frame to the position, and that's a simplification. Like, since games run at different frame rates, you don't necessarily want to add 1 to the player position every frame, because, you know, frame rates vary, and so that means your speed's gonna vary, and there are ways around that. You can multiply by time. That's the most popular. That's the way I use. I think that's, I don't know another way to do it. But yeah, that's like a very linear approach, as like a mathematical approach. So do you want to have this like physicsy, leaning into the physics engine of the game engine you're using, where you are applying pushes to things, and maybe the end result is sort of chaotic? Or do you want to have this very tight grip on how things work, where it is very like graphics, like, not graphics, but like graphical? I'm in the sense of like graphics calculator. Like, you could plot every point that the player moves, and like write a dissertation on on the movement. Like, it's very, you know, it's fixed. Like, he's here, he's there, and this is the position. Like, this is the exact coordinate I want my player to be at, given the input and the environmental constraints. And like, maybe an explosion happened, and you have to calculate the curve of the explosion and the force over time, because it's all linear, right? Like, it's all just math. You're just changing X, Y, Z coordinates. Do you want to have that approach? And like, to go back to the voice and sort of finding what you like as a game developer, I really liked the chaotic nature of a physics object, like the rigid body, right? Adding pushes and forces, and trying to make something feel good in that sense. And then, you know, I had all these ideas for external forces that could move my player character. Like, if I have an explosion, that's easy, right? Check for collision, and then check distance from uh, the player's position to the center of the explosion, and that's going to calculate the force required to push the player. If it's close to the center, then you do a big force. If it's kind of far away, you do a smaller force. And then you apply the explosion to the player. And you know, just sort of naturally, I had like these ideas, and I figured out that like that's the kind of player character I like to make. Is this very sort of physicsy, you know, chaotic, add force, and the forces can come from whatever. And it felt sort of organic in a way, and I like that. And you know, one of like one of my favorite things being an indie game developer is I sent my games to my friends, you know, so as you do. And eventually one of them said that like yeah, I could tell this is a game you made because it felt like the movement felt like a game you would make. And I don't know when that happened. But that was such a cool feeling of being like, oh, like my voice is starting to take shape. Like someone could play my game versus another game, and if they have experience with what I make, or they kind of know me at all, they could be like, oh yeah, that was the game that Jake made, because it moves like a game that Jake would make. That's so cool, you know? Like that's, I don't know, that's why I make games in a way. Like there's a lot into why you would make a game, but like that's definitely got to be on the list, right? Like to find your voice, to hear that people can recognize a game you've made. Like I don't know, going back to tutorials, it's like, how are you supposed to discern that from the tutorials? Like there's no there's no tutorial on like finding your voice as a game developer. Like, you know, that's, I don't know, I just think that's so cool, and I don't see a place where people talk about that. And maybe that's my own fault. Maybe people talk about this all the time, but like, I don't know, that's like the allure, you know? Like you're kind of doing what you set out to do. You said you were gonna make something, and you wanted it to be an art, and you wanted to express something, and then here you are making something, and people can tell that you made it because it feels like you made it. And like, man, isn't that the point? Isn't that like the whole thing that we're doing? I don't know, I just find it so cool. Like that's what motivates me to make games, is like the process of finding your voice, and figuring out what you like, and figuring out games that you like. Like, you know, I really like some games, but I would never make them because I would never enjoy programming them. And there are games that I would really enjoy programming, but like I do not enjoy playing. And those are funny because those are the ones where you have to like really hold back on your backseat development, because like, you know, we're all doing our best. You don't want to backseat someone, but it's like, man, I feel like you could have done something like this or that or whatever, but that doesn't matter. The point is that like I developed a voice, and I developed it after I learned tutorials. But it took me like 8 years. It took me a while, right? And man, like there has to be a way to like speed this up. Like it shouldn't have to take 8 years, you know? And I'm sure other people did it faster than me, but I'm sure other people did it slower than me. So I guess like looking back at tutorials, how can we make tutorials to teach these things, because there's a lot that goes on with games. It's not just programming, it's like art and sound and music, and then there's also game theory on top of all of that. Like, you can't forget, if you program something well but your game's not fun, then it's bad code. And it's like the only discipline of programming where like you could program something efficiently and then like it's still bad. It's just because it's not fun, which is like this subjective quality that like, how do you quantify fun? You know, what a terrible thing to be judged against. But then also, what an amazing thing to be judged against when it works, right? When you make something that's fun and you make something that you feel like you really wanted to make. That's so cool, you know? I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I think for this first journal, that was the idea that I wanted to say. I don't know, let me know. I'd be curious to know what you guys think. I don't know, if anyone watches this, like, I just would love to talk about this or games or whatever. Just leave a comment letting me know what you think. Okay. Alright. Well, thanks for listening. I do appreciate it. And I will get the next video out on inputs and programming for the tutorial series when I can. I'm discovering how hard it is to make content. It's like 30 minutes of poorly edited tutorial. It took me like a month. It's not so easy, but I'm gonna I'm gonna close out here. Thank you for watching. Okay, bye bye.